Hi everyone, this is Andrei Roman. I'm the CEO of AtlasIntel, and I would like to welcome you to a new edition of Atlas Deep Dive. Today we will be discussing our post-election debrief. We will be looking at how Atlas polls performed in the US presidential election, and for that, joining me, you have Pedro Azevedo, our head of US coverage. How are you, Pedro?
Hi, boss. Very happy to be here today after our results.
Post-election debrief, aka victory lap. Yeah, this is one of the more happy occasions for recording our podcast. So let's look at how we did. Let's look at the data. Once again, second time in a row, Atlas polls were the most accurate ones at the national level. We're still waiting for California to count its votes, okay? So we cannot yet say for sure that Trump's margin over Kamala Harris is 1.5%. It may be 1.4, it may be 1.6. It's around that. Either way, if the margin changes a bit because of the last votes counted in California in particular, it's not going to change this ranking much, and it's not going to change the fact that, once again, Atlas was the most accurate pollster of the national popular vote. I don't really like trashing our competitors. You have the list here. I think the data speaks for itself. I would say that one thing that differentiates us in this cycle is not just the fact that we got one result right, like the national popular vote, but the fact that we pretty much got it right across the board. When you think about our performance across swing states, when you think about the stability of our estimates over time, when you think about the way we projected the Electoral College, when you think about the Senate races that we projected as well, many of the Senate races were actually quite different in terms of the outcome than the vote for president. So I would point not just to one result. The one that's on this slide is the most, the one that people look at the most. But I think, the quality of our work is measured first and foremost through its consistency and also through its stability across time. We pretty much had a call that Trump was very much favored to win this election before any other pollster. There's some more right-wing pollsters that also had very good results at the end. I would actually like to, congratulate Rasmussen on quite precise results, particularly in the swing states. And there were others, but I think probably the ones out there in the audience that have, watched Atlas release its polls over time, you are witnesses to what we did, right? So you probably noticed that we came with the call that Trump was ahead in the national popular vote by a considerable margin before even the right-wing pollsters or the ones that are usually more associated with, a conservative inclination, let's say, came to the same conclusion.
We have the time series to prove it too. If we
we have the time series here. So ever since July through September, through October, through the 2nd of November, through the 4th of November, our data was very much consistent, with always presenting Trump with a slight advantage over Kamala Harris at the national popular vote. This is very significant because if you really believe this, it was clear that the likelihood of Trump winning was much greater than whatever than what any aggregator or analyst was pointing to. So if you really believe this data, it was very hard to buy a call that there was a 50-50 chance between Trump and Kamala Harris winning the day before Election Day, which is what models such as 538 or Nate Silver were were pointing to. Well, actually, they were pointing to 50% point 0 something for Kamala Harris.
40,012 simulations out of 80,000.
Yeah. So let's actually look at that too. We have a comparison here of our errors versus aggregators and models of the election at the national level and in every swing state. And what you can see here is that our error was way below pretty much any aggregator. 0.5 percentage point error across national and the 7 swing states we covered. Best errors for us, or actually no error in the case of Nevada, almost perfect in Michigan, almost perfect in Wisconsin. 0.3 at the national level. We're still waiting for the final count to see exactly what the national error was, but it was really small. And less than 1 percentage point in Arizona and Georgia. Slightly above 1 in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. In all of these cases,
I'd point out also that Arizona can still shift a bit as well because they also aren't done counting their votes. But that's, when we made this table, Arizona was at about 85% of votes counted. So the variation will be minimal, I think.
I think in Arizona, actually, the error is probably less than what we have in this table here. But either way, it was really good. Decision Desk did a really good job, as far as aggregators go. I think we should point that out. All other aggregators, well, actually, Decision Desk and Real Clear Politics. For looking at the errors here, there are only 2 aggregators that had an error lower than 2 points, and those were Decision Desk and Real Clear Politics. And as you can see on this heat map, it was pretty systematic across the swing states and at the national level that this happened. It's quite interesting to see Real Clear Politics do such a good job with such a simple approach to how they aggregate polls. Essentially, they'll say, hey, give me the last poll of credible pollsters out there. I'll throw it into the average, and that's it. And they had a much better call than really complex models. Split Ticket, 538, the Nate Silver model, New York Times. Sometimes parsimony, simplicity, transparency, when not all of these aggregators are that transparent, that goes a long way. So congrats to Decision Desk, congrats to Real Clear Politics on a job well done in the cycle, even as our error was still considerably lower than theirs. But I mean, that's because the other polls were saying different things than we were.
Yeah, the aggregators can't shift too much away from the polls, right?
Yeah.
I'd point out, and I think that's really important also for what we're covering here, that it's interesting that the polls, again, all missed in the same direction here. Because actually this year, if we look at the error in the aggregates and in the averages, 2.5 points is a big miss, but not that much of a miss. It's less than 2016. It's less than 2020 for the polling industry.
Remember
in general,
that these averages also include Atlas polls
as well.
And
yes.
We had lots of polls. So I'd actually be interested. We're going to run an analysis of how these averages shift if you take out our polls, because they will shift a bit.
Definitely. But they'll shift even more, I think, in the direction that I was going to point out, I think, here. That is, again, all the polls seem to have underestimated Trump, which we've been talking about.
Even us, if you're going to look at our polls, we were so attacked for being, the most Trump-friendly pollster. And we're going to end up actually underestimating Trump, or with the Kamala bias of, I think, 0.5 or something like that. So
so there's a component there of, again, these low propensity voters and these voters that don't come out for anyone but Trump. He's managed to tap into these people, and that continues to be a problem, for the polling industry as a whole. As that's, I think, even more interesting than the magnitude of the error is the direction of the error here. That is, once again, there were so many discussions throughout the election cycle of, could the polls be wrong? If the polls are going to be wrong, in what direction are they going to be wrong? And many people, had were betting on, this time, if they're going to be wrong, they're probably underestimating Kamala because they might have overcorrected for Trump because of the errors in 2016 and 2020. And we see that again, even if they did overcorrect, which we don't know, that wasn't enough.
They did not overcorrect.
That's again, that's really, a big puzzle for, I think, the polling industry as a whole to solve. And maybe we can help show the way.
In retrospect, I think it makes a lot of sense. I remember I read a lot of Nate Kahn's takes on the election.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them were really insightful and proved to be correct. So if you think about his whole thesis on realignment, we had the realignment for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some, structural changes in the electorate, the way Trump appealed to African Americans, to Latinos, that now looking at the exit polls totally validate whatever Nate Kahn was arguing on realignment.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one take in particular that Nate had that ended up being really salient, even as Siena polls didn't correct for it, which was turnout. He had at some point, he wrote an article saying it may all end up depending on turnout. And if you look at what happened, and we have lots of data now to analyze who showed up to vote and who didn't. When it comes to the national popular vote, when it comes to some of these states that were decided by very low margins, turnout mobilization by Trump was really strong and really made a difference. Perhaps if that would have been accounted for in Siena polls, they would have come closer and they wouldn't have had, the missed forecasts in some of the states where Atlas ended up pointing to the winner correctly, like in Michigan, like in Wisconsin, like in Pennsylvania. And in particular, I also remember one thing that, Nate Kahn wrote at some point, which was not really, an idea, but more of an analysis that was sort of a conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible to have Trump up 6 in Arizona and Kamala up 6 in Pennsylvania? Well, it was impossible, right? It's because Kamala was not up 6 in Pennsylvania. So there was something there, sort of a differential quality in Siena polls, capturing better the environment in Sunbelt states than in Rust Belt states. I think they really did a very good job in Sunbelt states, but not really in Rust Belt states. Whereas we managed to be close across the board. And that also, kind of validates our view in the post-election assessment, that Trump was actually very strong in the Rust Belt to begin with, that there was something about his message, that there was something about how it resonated in these more impoverished, rural, or maybe post-industrial communities in the Rust Belt that struck a particular chord. So even as states like Michigan structurally provided a much better environment for a Democrat win, Trump had, because of his message, a way to kind of reverse that advantage, and that ended up happening. And I'm very happy because, no one else was really saying he's going to win Michigan. And we were saying he's going to win Michigan since the very beginning.
From our first polls, yeah.
From our very first poll. And
Would
look
you
at
say, we were talking about, you mentioned turnout modeling and how that maybe helped us have a more accurate result. Would you also say that about our methodology, about random digital recruitment? Would you say that that has an impact in reaching out to some voters that maybe, more less likely voters who are less likely to answer polls and who have a lower social trust?
Yeah.
Do you think that since we recruit them from the internet and they're answering it on their phone, just them and their screen without talking to a third person who's collecting their answers on the phone, a stranger? Do you think that helps in in reaching out to these voters that maybe other polls couldn't capture as well, and who were what Trump needed to pull through in the Rust Belt states? Does that help?
It's really hard to look at these results and say that this was just a lucky election for AtlasIntel, right? Because these errors are really small in all of these swing states and at the national level, and it happened, on the back of us being one of the most precise pollsters in the 22 midterms and the most precise pollster at the national level in 2020. So that'll be a huge amount of luck. Maybe someone should model the chance of this being luck. It would be really small. The fact that we had such low errors across the board really points to a methodology edge, or perhaps a methodological superiority. At this point in time. This maybe wasn't always the case, but at this moment in time, it appears to be. And that, should instigate those academics or professional organizations, APOR, to think about this and understand, what made the Atlas method so much better in the cycle compared to some of the other methods. And I can give you a few clues as to why I think that was the case. I think the human interaction bias exists. I think we have enough proof to document it in the past two cycles. I think it existed in this cycle once again. And it's just very intuitive to think about why and how it happens. So imagine you're a young woman in a state that discusses, abortion rights, and you're being called by another woman to give your perspective on the presidential election. And perhaps you're thinking of voting for Trump because you're maybe unemployed, or because you're kind of outraged because of the immigration influx that's happening in the US. Perhaps it's because you really believe in, Trump's message on the economy and opportunities for Americans and, bringing jobs back. And I'm not going into whether, the platform, what Trump is promising, whether that's credible or not, or whether he's going to be able to deliver on that or not, whether he is lying to his voters or not. That doesn't matter.
We're talking about the message here.
Simply about,
what
how,
saying.
How the psychology of a voter who's a woman who doesn't really like Trump's stance on abortion rights at all, but for whom the salience of other themes in the election is so much greater, so much more relevant, that she's actually considering voting for Trump. And she's being called by another woman on the phone to give her perceptions and actually declare, who she's going to vote for. The chance that, this woman will be, somewhat reluctant to engage in a conversation and declare, her vote exists. And in Brazil, we have had similar situations where we were able to ascertain this human interaction bias in a different setting. One of our competitors here in Brazil, Futura, if I remember correctly, at some point ran an analysis comparing vote preferences among males, comparing those males that were interviewed by other males with those that were interviewed by women. And they found out that the declared vote among men that were interviewed by other men when it came to Bolsonaro, I think this was in the 2018 election, was 10 percentage points above men interviewed by women.
Oh, wow.
If that doesn't prove a human interaction bias or a shy voter effect, I don't know what does. Okay, 10 percentage points is huge. Okay,
That's a massive difference.
so if that was the case, and RDD, random digital dialing approach that most US pollsters still use, even as they combine it in a hybrid sample with other methods, I think that's a very good point to start for understanding what could have gone wrong. But when you have a systematic bias of such magnitude, when polls are wrong across the board, because some of these pollsters don't apply this method. They have, for example, online panels. I think YouGov does online panel. Morning Consult does. So in the case of YouGov Morning Consult, the hypothesis I just described is probably not what explains the error. When you think about Ipsos, I think they do a lot of mailed letters, and people also have some anonymity in terms of how they participate.
Yeah.
So there's no human interaction. When there's no human interaction, then the error should be looked for in a different place. And that's when you get into response rates, whether people actually are motivated to participate in the polls, and other sources of error, including herding. So pretty much pollsters adhering to some sort of consensus to diminish reputational risk. Okay, not everyone is, crazy like Atlas to stake out an independent view going against the entire consensus and risk, irreparable reputational damage forever. Okay,
Yeah.
if we were wrong, and Kamala would have one half of the swing states we were saying Trump was going to win, our reputation would have been hurt probably in an irreparable way in the U.S. going forward. There would have been no AtlasIntel U.S. for a long time.
This podcast would have a very different tone in that world.
Would probably not be recording it. So I think that also contributed a bit to the errors as well. And that is also kind of it's verifiable. So you can pretty much look at data patterns and find herding where it exists, including when it comes to aggregators, because I think aggregators also herded in this election. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk a bit about what happened in each state. We have here a map of the Electoral College, and we're very happy to affirm that in all the states where we had Trump ahead, he won, so that our projection of this map was perfect, which is, I think, the only instance where a pollster or an aggregator out of the major ones, I mean, maybe you have, more amateur or, a random guy on Twitter who also had a brilliant projection. But when it comes to, institutions that have a real stake in projecting elections, and when you think about all the pollsters, and then you think about the major newspapers and the forecasters, we were the only one to get all of the states on the electoral map right in the cycle.
I'd point out here as well that take this opportunity. You mentioned earlier, how Nate Kahn was talking about perhaps a realignment, how to explain, when he had that New York Times Siena poll that had Trump and Harris sort of tied at the national level, and Harris ahead in Pennsylvania. Of course, we now know that was an overestimation of Harris in Pennsylvania, but that thesis of the realignment, we really saw that bear out here, and it was also something that we were bringing up, right? Because we had, in a different magnitude but similar results, right? If you were looking at, based on what happened in 2020, where Biden won by like 4 points and the swing states were like razor-thin margins, you'd expect 1.5 points for Trump in the popular vote to be a blowout. And we weren't seeing that in our data. And, Nate Kahn also wasn't seeing that in his data.
And it didn't happen in the end. The swing states were systematically closer than non-swing states when it came to how much Trump improved.
Which exactly demonstrates what we were talking about, and to some extent what Nate Kahn was talking about, right? Exactly. We saw Trump greatly improve his margins in New York, in California, in Illinois, in New
Florida.
Jersey, and on the other side, on the red states,
Ohio.
in Florida, in Texas, in Iowa. And so we saw that the advantage for Republicans in the Electoral College, right, where Biden had to win by 4 points in order to be competitive in the swing states, did not materialize here because those votes were perhaps distributed less efficiently this time around, right? We were seeing, votes where Trump isn't competitive because Kamala would win anyway, like California or Illinois or New York, and where, of course, he wasn't competitive because he was already going to win anyway, like Texas and Florida, where he went from around, I believe the margins were like 6 points for Trump in 2020, and now they were 14 plus 14 for Trump in Florida, plus 13 in Texas. He came within single digits in Illinois and New Jersey, and so we're seeing that a redistribution of these votes, perhaps.
This is really worrying for Democrats because when it comes to Latinos and African Americans, if this trend solidifies, and this is sort of that momentum where you think perhaps the future is all different from the past. Mm-hmm. Maybe, whatever we thought about the structure of U.S. politics has changed. There was this thesis that because of how much the Latino population is growing in Texas, within our lifespan, Texas could become blue.
A blue state.
Because of Latinos. And what we're seeing now is more of, well, maybe California could become red. Or maybe New York could become red. Because of how different these tendencies are and how much they've actually reversed. Mm-hmm. So if this trend of, overperformance or, recovery of the conservative vote, well, I'm not even sure it's safe. It's correct to call it recovery because they never had it. I mean, they've never had a stronghold in the Latino vote or in the Black vote. But if this trend of consolidation in the minority vote continues, the Democrats are in really bad shape moving forward. And it was interesting to see how, in the aftermath of this election, the Democrats seemed a bit, consumed by, finger pointing. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was because of, blacks not voting Democrat like they should have, or Latinos, or, young women not participating as much as they did, or, and so Bernie Sanders came out saying that, Democrats betrayed the working class. And then people pointing to the fact that his own result wasn't that great in his own state. So that kind of like infighting based on, this identity-based politics, I think it has proved quite destructive for Democrats in the cycle. And if it's going to stay at that, essentially it's only going to help Republicans going forward. That's at least my perception.
Well, I'd be curious. I am curious. I mean, we have a long way to go until there, but I'm curious about what the Republican Party looks like after Trump? Because I think what we see here and what we saw, we're going to look at the Senate.
Mixed picture,
we're
right?
going to look at the Senate results later, right? Where
It's a
we
mixed.
have
There's still significant resistance to Trump and the right wing electorate. You look at Kari Lake in Arizona. That's a state that basically screams, "Okay, we want Trump, but no way we're gonna swallow Kari Lake together with him."
Yeah, exactly.
That was a very strong message, I think, and it was not just in Arizona. It came in other places as well. And the best time to witness the impact of something like this is during midterms. So if Trump really looks for building hegemony within the Republican Party, only, surrounding himself with loyalists and kind of alienating the more moderate Republicans, it's possible that will actually help Democrats recover in the midterms. I think, the smartest choice for Trump would be that of, seeking to build consensus and pacifying the Republican Party. And I think the appointments he made so far point to that, actually. Yeah, I don't know. I'll explain.
Okay.
He has some very controversial appointments, right? Like the Attorney General, one in particular. But he also named Rubio. Okay. He expressed, he gave very strong signals that he will work well with the Senate Majority Leader, who perhaps would not have been, who's not a Trump loyalist. He'll mix his strategies. So, for example, the Attorney General, I think it's pretty clear that it won't pass through the Senate.
Yeah.
But then, he put the guy, he submitted him to a vote in the US Congress. What does he gain? He keeps his base mobilized and he shows that he is loyal to the people that are loyal to him. Oh, it didn't work because the vote didn't pass.
Then that's his problem.
Exactly. And then he's going to work with whomever Congress chooses. So there is a way out for Trump, I think. And if he's learned anything from his first term, I think it will have to be, working with more moderate Republicans well, because if he doesn't, there will be a political toll that will be felt at the next midterms, for sure.
Well, we'll see. But I point out also that there are many less moderate Republicans left, I think, in the Senate now than there were in 2016. But I'm curious to see how the Matt Gaetz nomination goes, because even with a Republican Senate, I don't think he's going to get confirmed.
Oh, no,
so I
not.
want to see Trump's reaction to that. I'd point out that also he has already, before the Senate Majority Leader vote, before the Senate Majority Leader election, Trump already tweeted out that whoever won, he would like that person to allow for recess appointments, right? So the Senate wouldn't have to vote on confirming his nominees. And so I would point out that the way I see it is, I think he's saying he'll work with the Senate if the Senate works with him. He's saying, okay, if you do that for me, we'll be.
That's what he always does, right? He's looking for a deal, and he's looking to improve his position for negotiating that deal. So if you're looking for a deal on the Attorney General, to be a guy that you like, make the most radical appointment you can possibly make, and then the second one will be better than what you would have got.
Will sound great
at the
in
beginning,
comparison.
Right? So I think that there's lots of that embedded in what's taking place right now with these appointments. Okay, well, let's look at how we did state by state. You have here our errors, including some states that were not swing states, or were not supposed to be. Maybe they were.
Maybe we should have pulled Illinois and New Jersey. And
so you can see here that Atlas polls performed well in places like Virginia, where we had Harris ahead by 5.4 and she got 5.2. So we overestimated her result in Virginia by 0.2. That was a surprise. That was very close.
Mm-hmm.
In Minnesota, we had an error of 2.3, but that 4.3 result for Harris in Minnesota looks really bad. I mean, that essentially means Minnesota has pretty much become a swing state as well. It will be a swing state in the next election, very likely.
It's a
based on
tight
this
margin.
That's a very small margin. And then the states we missed the most, it's because we underestimated Trump's win in Ohio. He won by 11 and we were pointing to 8.5.
Mm-hmm.
And in Texas, we were pointing to 10.6 and he won by 14. Now, in both Ohio and Texas, I think Atlas was giving some of the larger margins for Trump. So that error, even as it was higher for us, it was still way below the average pollster error for those states. All in all, I'm very happy with how this came to fruition. So in terms of our performance,
I'd point out that even when we were looking at that table with the aggregators, for example, we could see that the largest errors among, at least in the swing state polls, right, were for Nevada and for Arizona. And so
in which we came really close.
In which we came really close, exactly. So I think that really shows, again, our ability to, I think, reach harder to find voters.
And that also points to herding, in my opinion, because those were states that he won by a larger margin, but were swing states. So I think there are lots of pollsters who are just converging closer to a smaller margin.
Right,
so
it was a reputational risk to say that
we don't want to
claim those kinds of margin for Trump.
We don't want to. What if Harris wins Arizona and we were saying Trump would win it by a huge margin? What if, and in Nevada even more, because structurally it was a much more favorable state for Democrats in past cycles. So yeah, in Nevada and Arizona, I think we really stood out because we had the courage of just releasing the data we had, which showed larger margins for Trump than in the other swing states. One other sweet spot I would point to is North Carolina. So remember how, North Carolina was to be supposed to be, and also Georgia. So Georgia and North Carolina and the polling averages before election day were supposed to be some of the best states for Trump, and they weren't. Neither of them. Georgia was actually very close at 2.3, and North Carolina was actually really close as well at 3.4. So essentially, Trump didn't really improve in North Carolina, and he only improved marginally in Georgia compared to the past election. So remember when we presented the map where we had Trump winning every state besides North Carolina and besides Georgia. Actually, in our last poll, Georgia in one of the scenarios was tied. That also points to the fact that we were onto something. Okay, so North Carolina and Georgia in a map that looked terrific for Trump were outliers. He didn't really improve in those states. Why? We also pointed out to the reasons, because these are states that are going through structural changes. There are people coming from outside, younger voters that are now participating in the electoral process in Georgia. The fact that the economic opportunities in these places, in the suburbs of Atlanta or in the Durham region in North Carolina, amount to a very different economic environment than what you have in the metropolitan regions of Michigan, for example, or Pennsylvania. That means that this is a much better place structurally for Democrats to perform well, and this is exactly what ended up happening. So that's one other thing that I would point out.
The Atlanta suburbs were actually one of the few places where Kamala actually had a better performance than Biden in 2020. Yep. So we were talking earlier about how the realignment we're seeing in California and Illinois and New Jersey might be a problem, a big worry for Democrats. The counterpoint to that is that Georgia and North Carolina seem like good news for the Democrats. They seem like states that are going to be more competitive. These are places where the Democrats could really invest more, because it seems their machinery for turning out voters, especially in Atlanta and, maybe in North Carolina now too, are getting, growing stronger and more competent. So what happened here, of course, was that Trump had incredible turnout against, the more rural voters, the white voters. So that this time sort of drowned out the Atlanta vote that ended up giving Biden the victory in 2020 and couldn't give Harris the victory this year. But I would say that Georgia and North Carolina, exactly like you said, they weren't big improvements for Trump, and these might actually be the silver lining for Democrats, if there is one in this election.
I totally agree. Let's also talk about the Senate races a bit. Here you see our errors for the Senate races. We had Lake at 0.6, and Gallego, I think, is poised to win by around 2. So that's one of our errors. But hey, the difference between Lake and Trump is insane, okay? And I mean, few would expect that Lake would lose this race with the margin that Trump had. So this really points to, an electoral behavior that I think perhaps was not even able to be captured well by polls, because many voters probably arrived to the booth and said, I just can't wait to vote for I just can't vote for Carrie Lake. I think there was something about, a resistance to her figure that spoke stronger at the moment when the ballots were cast on election day, in my opinion, looking at the margins.
Which is also what we were talking about, I think, in our last episode before the election, where we had, exactly this scenario, right?
But we told you.
So, Carrie, someone being, 0.6 percentage point ahead in a poll, we had a margin of error of 2 percentage points, I think maybe 3 in Arizona. That's essentially a tie. And I think you'll remember we talked about how in the situation that this is almost a tie, I would give the advantage to Gallego, because Carrie Lake is a very poor candidate. And so that's what we saw here. I think the big surprise really here is Pennsylvania.
I agree.
The big,
that's the biggest surprise.
What we didn't call here is definitely
based on the patterns in all the other states, you would expect Casey to win this race, and he lost it. So most likely, when we're talking about this huge realignment, Pennsylvania is one of the places where the realignment theory perhaps spoke stronger. I think there's also much to be said about the turnout machine that the Republicans built in Pennsylvania. It was very much a collaborative effort between the Trump campaign and, Elon Musk and, social media influencers and grassroots organizers. It's quite impressive, based on what happened in all the other states, to see McCormick win this race. I would not have expected it. We had Casey at 2.7 in our final poll.
Yeah, and to that point, Pennsylvania was actually, out of the 3 Rust Belt states this cycle, Pennsylvania was the reddest. Trump won Wisconsin by, I have it here, by 0.8 percentage point. He won in Michigan by 1.4. And now Pennsylvania, he's 1.8 ahead. So that was the strongest state for Trump. And we were talking about again in the episode before the election about how Casey Jr. would likely win re-election, and we mentioned exactly the turnout machine and the strength of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, and the fact that Casey is an incumbent senator and is from a very well-established political family, right?
Yeah.
His father was governor of Pennsylvania, so he's a very well-established figure in the state, right?
His
And we were
ratings
talking
were
that-
really good. I mean, I remember his ratings, his image ratings were really good. So it's really, this is one of those things that I think, academics should really study. How did Casey actually lose this race?
I'd point out we were talking about his him being a very established figure there as a positive for him. But maybe if we're talking in the context of anti-establishment, anti-incumbent voting, this sort of rebellion against the current state of affairs, maybe that was actually a hindrance to him instead of a positive thing, right? Maybe perhaps that dragged him down.
The anti-establishment sentiment is the main theme of this map that looks at the relative performance of Senate Democrat candidates versus Kamala Harris. Essentially, the way you should read this map is that the more it is blue, the more the Senate Democrat candidate overperformed in comparison to Kamala Harris. And when it's red, the redder it gets, it's because they underperformed. So it's really interesting to look here at some of the states colored in blue and figure out that, people in Minnesota really love Klobuchar and people in Maine really like Angus King. When it comes to Angus, I mean, he's always had that very independent Maine vibe that actually makes it difficult for people to label him as a Democrat. So in a sense, it's what you'd expect from Maine. Not very surprising there. But Klobuchar is different. I mean, Klobuchar is very much a Democrat firebrand. And so in an election where across the board you kind of see a rejection of the more radical aspects of the left discourse, to see Klobuchar perform this well really gives a beacon of hope to Democrats going forward, I would say. That perhaps not everything is lost, right? On the other hand, look at
also point
Massachusetts.
Out here, we see Ohio, we see Montana, we even see Texas. We see the Democratic candidates there strongly overperforming Harris, and that shows, I think, how much Trump grew in this election, right? And the fact that these overperformances, if I'm not mistaken, John Tester in Montana, he overperformed Harris by 13 points. And of course, Montana is one of the reddest states in the United States, right? But it just shows that even with this, there's a lot of resentment against the Biden administration in general, and how much Trump grew, that it shows that even with these levels of overperformances, these candidates still weren't able to beat their Republican adversaries, right? Where these local, with all this local support, strongly overperforming, how they that wasn't enough for them.
It's also interesting to see here that Democrats are starting to have issues in urban metropolitan areas on the East Coast and on the West Coast. So you look at California on this map and look at Boston and Massachusetts. Not looking good. Not looking good at all. Okay, well...
I'd also, just for us to give credit where credit is due, this map wasn't made by us. This map is by J. Miles Coleman from Sabato's Crystal Ball from, I think, today, November 14th, when we're recording this. November 14th edition of Sabato Crystal Ball. So thanks, J. Miles Coleman.
It's a really cool map. And really map. Useful for understanding what took place in this election.
And also, the fact that what we were talking about earlier, how we saw a lot of, many people who are voting, come to vote for Trump, and these voters that turn out for Trump and don't turn out for the rest of the Republicans, like we were talking about with Kari Lake, but we're seeing this, all over the map, and these overperformances by Harris, and these overperformances compared to Harris, right? Sorry. How we're seeing a lot of this ticket splitting, and a lot of these people who really, it really shows that the turnout that Trump got was for Trump and maybe not for the other Republican candidates. So like we were talking about earlier, it's going to be interesting, in the midterms, for example, how all these Republicans fare without Trump on the ballot.
So we kind of went on a victory lap with the data. Now I kind of want to go on a victory lap with what happened on Reddit and social media. There was lots of criticism of our work prior to election day, and it was mostly based on this misinformation. Some of it will still clarify going forward. So, ideas such as our data from the past presidential election wasn't replicable. I assure you it is. And they missed the mayor race in Sao Paulo. Well, has anyone looked into what happened in the mayor race in Sao Paulo for us to miss it? With a candidate accusing another candidate of being a cocaine user with a fake medical record the day before the vote. So, lots of misinformation, and it really amounted to hate. So, we were dealing with this. Guys, I hate to break it to you, but AtlasIntel are traitors and filthy scum that deserve to be banished from society for an eternity. And then, 1,000 comments explaining why this is the case. We went from this to this. Actually, Dune is one of my favorite movies, perhaps of all time. So this was really nice. Thank you, whoever posted this. It really made not my day, but my week. I really liked it. This was also really cool. We're kind of in a media war against not 538, not ABC News, but Elliot Morris, because of how dishonest I think he was in the way he treated our work over the past few years. I invite you to discover what I'm talking about on my Twitter account, and you'll see lots of evidence in regards to that. So thank you to whoever posted this. That also made my day. And with that being said, my friends, I would like to thank you, Pedro, for your amazing work, in this presidential cycle. It was very much a privilege working with you and analyzing all of this stuff. And, it was really hard to put it all together, particularly as we were such a dissonant, pollster compared to all the other ones. So thanks for your great work.
Likewise, Andrei. You're the boss, you lead, I follow. It's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for the opportunity and for everything we've done this year. And
there's
thanks a
more
lot
coming.
to everyone who's watched and listened and went on this wild roller coaster ride with us.
And just like in Dune, there's always a next chapter. So see you guys.